welcome into another edition of the Insiders Podcast. I'm Jenna Harner. He's Mike DeFabo from The Athletic. And we are coming down the final stretch of the season. It is December. It is time. I'm probably going to misphrase this as I'm saying it, but it's time when Steelers fans are used to unleashing hell. Is that exactly how we phrase this?
No,
In
that's correct.
the
That's correct. The Unleash Hell in December was infamously when the Steelers were struggling and Mike Tomlin said, "This is our time. We're going to unleash hell in December," and then they completely fell on their faces. And so when you say this is the time when the Steelers unleash hell in December, you're absolutely right, because November and December collapses have been routine for this team. We saw it happen last year. And it kind of feels like there's warning signs that it's happening yet again, or maybe it's already in the midst of happening now that they've lost 5 of their last 7 games.
It's been a rough stretch. There's no denying that. And it's been interesting because it's felt like the Steelers, hey, the Bears game, gotta get this one, gotta have this one to contend in the AFC North. They don't win that game. Then the Bills game, where you felt like there was a lot of opportunity for the Steelers to capitalize against a Bills team that is not the Bills team that they're used to seeing year in, year out in the past handful of blowouts. And guess what? It turned out into a blowout because the Steelers could not do anything in the second half offensively, and defensively they could not stop the run. And the Bills set the rushing. I'm going to mess this stat up, and I'm going to attempt to phrase it. I was getting Mike. For those who want to know a little bit about the behind the scenes, I got a text from Mike on Sunday saying that my script was redundant because visiting opponents.
It was not a criticism.
It was in love. It was in love. I was saying it was a joke, but the Steelers allowed the most rushing yards by an opponent ever at Acrisure Stadium / Heinz Stadium in the 21-year history of the stadium. 25-year. It's about to be 25.
Yeah, it was really bad. And TJ Watt was especially frustrated. He said it felt like they just kept lining up and running the same play over and over again. What he's referring to is this inside zone run that they just kept having success on. And I think it was just yet another example of how far this defense has fallen short of the expectations for this team. And I feel like Darius Slay, who was a healthy scratch in that game and now has been waived and released, I think that unfortunately, I don't mean to pick on him, he's a perfect microcosm for what's gone wrong for the Steelers defense. When the Steelers signed him to a 1-year, $10 million contract, Mike Tomlin was standing up there at the podium saying he felt like that with Slay and Ramsey and Joey Porter Jr., the Steelers had the corners capable of manning up anyone in the league. And he felt like this defense had the chance to do things that were historic. Those were his words, not mine. And now here they are a few weeks later, and Ramsey has been forced to play safety, and Slay can't even get on the field to the point that he's released. And so if you were to say, what does Slay represent? They paid him too much, he's too old, and they believed in him way too much. Who does that describe? I feel like every member of the Steelers defense falls into that category of either being overpaid, overrated, or just simply being past their prime. And I think that that's the problem that the Steelers have more than anything else right now on their team.
I think it's one of the most disappointing parts of everything, too, when you look at what the expectations were for this defense coming into the season, because the offseason, the storyline was, okay, you're signing Aaron Rodgers. You do not need him to be this MVP caliber quarterback that he has in years past, nor do I think anybody expected him to be that. He's not that at this stage in his career. But you didn't need him to do too much because of the fact that you had this defense that was going to be playing lights out, that was going to be much better against stopping the run, that was going to be able to, defend Jamar Chase and T. Higgins when it came to man coverage. And that was going to be able to force all these splash plays, create turnovers, and that was what they were going to live and die on. And that, to me, is truly the most disappointing part of this season up to this point, because not only has the offense not lived up to expectations, the bar wasn't very high for this offense. The defense, particularly, has fallen so completely short and so completely flat of what was expected. I mean, it is almost laughable. You mentioned the comments that were said by Mike Tomlin. Juan Thornhill said this could be one of the best defenses ever. He's not even on the team anymore. I mean, it's embarrassing, quite frankly. It's abysmal.
Yeah, it really is, and the challenges only get tougher from here.
Yeah.
So, now the Steelers go and they play the Baltimore Ravens, and you go back to June, and Terrell Austin during OTA said, "We had a Baltimore problem," and he acknowledged that the Ravens ran the ball down their throats. And at the time, the Steelers were 10-4 when they went into M&T Bank Stadium in late December. They gave up 200 plus rushing yards, and the division starts to slip away. They go back to M&T Bank Stadium for the playoff game in early January and gave up 299 rushing yards. And so you look at this team and you say, okay, so what did they do to address the problem that they can't stop the run? They drafted Derek Harmon in the first round. Okay, that's a
Yeah.
great first step. Derek
Mhm.
Harmon, I have a lot of faith in. I think when he's been out there, he has been very good and as advertised. But that's all that they did. They basically
Mhm.
drafted Derek Harmon and expected him to play every single game, step into the starting lineup immediately, and never ever get hurt. And now that he's injured, there's nothing different about this defense than a year ago. And
No.
if anything, they're worse because Isaiah Loudermilk is hurt. Okay.
Yep.
He was a guy that they drafted and never developed. He never developed into anything more than a depth piece. And we would be complaining about how he's playing right now if he was healthy. They signed Daniel Ekawale, who had a history of PED offenses. And when he got another PED offense in addition to a torn ACL. They had Dean Lowry, who was on his last leg, and now he tore the the ACL in his last leg.
Ooh,
He's done,
brutal.
during training camp, and that was during training camp. And so
Yeah.
I feel like the answer should have been included an and somewhere. How are you going to fix the Baltimore problem? Draft Derek Harmon and sign some type of a legitimate defensive lineman who, could contribute, can be injury insurance or age insurance for Cam Hayward and insurance for Keanu Benton not taking another step forward like we've been waiting for so long for him to do. And they didn't do it. And then not to mention, I feel like just their inside linebackers, like they've got a lot of them, but like I think they're missing in a Landon Roberts. Like they have
Yeah.
Malik Harrison, but I feel like he's a step back from what a Landon Roberts was giving them last year. And I feel like, you put it all together and it's like it's no coincidence that they're struggling against the run right now.
No, you miss Landon Roberts' presence a whole lot right now too. You mentioned obviously the Steelers and Darius Slay in the mutual parting of ways. The Steelers also making a few other moves. With Slay being released, they move Asante Samuel Jr. up to the active roster. That felt expected. They also picked up Adam Thielen off waivers. So if you thought, hey, the Steelers got rid of Slay, they got a little younger. In comes 35-year-old Adam Thielen. So you and Adam Thielen are the same age. How does that make you feel, first
And
off?
Adam Thielen, hey, maybe I should play wide receiver for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I've got the height that they're looking for. I'm
I
about
mean,
5'8", so I would fit right into their wide receiver room currently. And I can't get open either, which would also fit into their wide receiver room currently. Um, look, like this is a very low risk move by the
yeah,
Steelers, but I also feel like there's a very low probability that he significantly moves the needle. At one point in his career, Adam Thielen would have made perfect sense with Aaron Rodgers and Arthur
yep,
Smith. He's a pretty detailed, precise route runner. He works the middle of the field. He's a bigger target than what the Steelers have. All that would seem to fit with Aaron Rodgers. He's a very willing blocker. You can line him up as a big slot. You can line him up outside. That would seem to fit with what Arthur Smith likes to do as a run-heavy offensive coordinator. But he's 35 years old right now. And in 11 games with the Vikings, he caught 8 passes. And he was a healthy scratch for a team headed nowhere in the Minnesota Vikings. So, I mean, I've never even met the guy. I've never talked to him. I don't mean to trash him so much, but if you think that Adam Thielen is going to be the thing that saves the season or reignites what's become a stagnant offense, I think you're lying to yourselves, and you need to probably temper expectations a bit.
I think that tempering expectations kind of feels like the theme of the season at this point. The offense, I mean, my goodness, there was so much that went wrong. I don't even know where to start because on Sunday, there was optimism when they're ahead. The thing, I guess, the point that I want to go to, the thing that is really been mind boggling to me is the way that when the offense has started the second half with the football, they have just missed opportunities left and right.
Yeah, I think that was definitely significant. I mean, the game really swung on Aaron Rodgers taking that sack, his face getting bloodied, and from the time he went into the medical tent until the time he came out, the Bills scored 2 touchdowns, and Mason Rudolph had thrown an interception, and the game basically had unraveled while he was in the medical tent. But even when he was out there, I think we're starting to see some signs that Aaron Rodgers is regressing. You know,
Mm.
you just look at the last 10 quarters that Rodgers has played, beginning with that game against the Chargers on the road, including the first half against the Bengals, and then now the most recent game. You know, his passer rating is way down. It's in the 60s in those games. His completion percentage is just 52% over the last 10 quarters. He's turned the ball over 3 times and only thrown for 2 touchdowns. And what I wonder and my concern is, are we seeing history repeating itself? Sometimes I think that I'm a pessimistic downer yinzer who always looks at things and thinks, oh, it's going to be another season that's like the same. But when the Steelers signed Aaron Rodgers, my big takeaway was we've seen this story before. We've seen the Steelers try to win by paying a ton to their defense, believing in them a lot, and then saying, well, we've got this aging quarterback, and he might not be what he once was, but we won't need him to be because we've got a good running game and a great defense. Well, that's exactly what happened when Ben Roethlisberger started 11-0 before that tailspin that season. That's the same thing that happened last year with Russell Wilson when the Steelers started out, what was it, 10-3 before their whole season collapsed upon itself. And I feel like you're seeing similar signs from Aaron Rodgers, where it's not like he can't play anymore. It's not like he's not a competent quarterback, but the flashes of brilliance are fewer and further between.
Yep.
Even in the game against the Chargers, he was able to hit, Darnell Washington with an incredible throw over the middle of the field, fit it into a tight window, had the kind of pace on the ball that like very few people could throw it that fast. So he has his moments, but it's just been inconsistent. And I think that teams are starting to recognize that the Steelers offense has a lot of limitations right now. And the biggest limitation is that Rodgers cannot throw the football downfield. He just can't. It's not working. And it's not all on him. I think that part of it is him. I think that he's been inaccurate or the ball has kind of fluttered on him when he's thrown the ball downfield. I think that he's been a bit reluctant to stand in the pocket to make the hits and to allow plays to develop so he can attack downfield. But by the same token, receivers are not getting open, and that includes DK Metcalf. Guys aren't where Aaron Rodgers expects them to be, which seems to be a big problem. The
Mhm.
offensive line, which has come together in some ways, isn't doing a good enough job to protect Rodgers to give him an opportunity to let these plays develop. So, it's not all on Rodgers, but when you as an offense are simply incapable of throwing the football downfield, that makes anything 3rd and 7 or longer virtually an impossibility. And I feel like that's one of the problems that the Steelers have right now.
And I know so many fans are so focused on, oh, he's not throwing over the middle and all the passing charts and things like that. And I think that kind of speaks exactly to what you were talking about. It's a combination of the receivers not getting open and Rodgers and Rudolph over the last couple games just missing receivers. Like from our vantage point in the press box, it's much different than the game broadcast. You're seeing the entire play develop. You're seeing the receivers run their routes compared to just the up close, TV view that we're used to watching when we're sitting on our couch on Sundays. There are plays to be made. They're just not being made because Rodgers/Rudolph is not getting the ball to those guys, or those receivers aren't creating enough separation and getting space to be able to make those plays. And I think that's a massive part of what is going wrong with this offense right now and why we're seeing them struggle so much to move the ball down the field.
Yeah, not to mention, I feel like their personnel usage is baffling to me. And
Yeah.
their roster construction has been very flawed. Um, like, how can you be paying two tight ends like their top 10 players at their position, yet neither one of them is producing at a level even close to that? It simply doesn't make any sense that like the Steelers almost are using Spencer Anderson more than they're using Pat Fryermuth. It seems like they have overlapping. Pat Fryermuth and Jonnu Smith have overlapping um, skill sets,
Yep.
and Arthur Smith loves his guy, and so he wants to get the ball to Jonnu Smith, and basically he's like, the hell with Pat Fryermuth, and I just doesn't make sense. Like if you only needed one of those body types, then you should have either not acquired Jonnu Smith, or you should trade Pat Fryermuth and bring in a real wide receiver. But to be an offense that has not enough talent at wide receiver, and then seemingly either like too much or too much of the same at tight end, that is flawed roster construction.
And again, with flawed roster construction as a whole, the Darius Slay choice, the Darius Slay signing, I think that we're going to look back on this season and see a lot of the missteps. And we talked so much at the start of the year about the lack of having a wide receiver. I think having that true wide receiver too. And there was so much, okay, well, Calvin Austin might fill into that role. You want Roman Wilson to take another step. None of that's happened. None of that, unfortunately, has happened. And I think that's why the Steelers are currently sitting in the position they're sitting in right now.
Yeah, I mean they had I remember a conversation with I think Omar did something on the record with reporters where right after the George Pickens trade, and someone said like,
Mm.
doesn't this feel like last year when you just had one really good receiver and then a big gap in everyone else? And he said, no, it's completely different. This is a different situation. Calvin Austin's more developed. Roman Wilson is healthy. We expect him to take a step. He even at one point mentioned Robert Woods. And so to me, it's just like they didn't acknowledge the fact that this was a major problem. And they've actually been fortunate, because if DK Metcalf ever would have gotten hurt this season, they would be
I
in such a big problem. But the
100%.
wild thing is, like, we've spent this 18 minutes right now just complaining and venting about what's wrong with the Steelers. You have to add but they
Asterisk.
also might win the division.
Which is crazy to me because I think if you said to anybody at the start of the season, "Hey, this is what the state of the AFC North is going to look like come," what is this, week 14? Are we in week
Week
14?
14.
Wow, we're in week 14. Math is hard in general, and then at this time of the year, it just gets thrown out the window because I barely even know what day it is. But if you had said at week 14, the Steelers and the Ravens are going to be contending for the AFC North title, I would have been like, okay, yeah, it makes sense. Wondered what happened to the Bengals. And then you added the caveat, oh, hey, by the way, they're both 6-6. I don't think anybody would have thought that. And hey, by the way, the Bengals, who are 2 games back with 4 wins on the year, they're in contention too.
Yeah, it's crazy because, like, I think the Steelers actually might have the easiest path to like 9 wins in the playoffs, because you look at what they have in front of them. Like, there's a million scenarios, and there's too many games to go through every one, but it feels realistic that they would split with the Ravens, given the Ravens' warts and the way that those matchups usually go. It feels realistic that they could beat the Browns, and it feels realistic that they could beat the Dolphins. That would get them
Yeah.
to 9 wins. that could be enough because you look at what Baltimore has in front of them. Let's say they split with the Steelers, that's one. They have to
Hmm.
play the Patriots and
Yep.
they have to play the Packers.
At
Neither one of
Lambeau.
those games at Lambeau, neither one of those games is going to be easy necessarily. They also have the Bengals one more time. And
Yep.
so, those are a couple tough games for them, and it feels like maybe it could be whichever team wins, is 8 or 9 wins and wins with tiebreakers. But one thing I do want to make clear is, like, I came away from the game against the Bills thinking the Steelers are very much still alive and in playoff contention. But the Steelers look nothing like a playoff team that deserves to be
No.
in the playoffs in their current state, let alone a team to win a playoff game and snap this drought. And
Yep.
and I think that really that should be, and I think it is for most fans, the bar for this team. If the Steelers were to win a playoff game, I think people would say that was a pretty successful season. The Steelers, they wouldn't be, um, you know, freaking out and going to Art Rooney's house and chanting "Fire Tomlin." But even if they limp their way into the playoffs, only to lose in the first round, I consider that a massive disappointment because of the approach that they took, bringing in all these veteran players, trying to convince themselves that they could win within this current window instead of finally in long overdue looking ahead towards the future. And you have to also just put it in the context of what's happened. To go 9 years without a playoff win is astonishing. Like, that's what it would be, and I just feel like that's what the bar is right now, where if the Steelers don't win a playoff game, I think it is fair to start wondering what's gonna happen at the top.
And it feels like we are careening towards that result. And what did we say before about a feeling like we've seen this story multiple times? It feels like it's going to come down to the final week. They're either going to, it's how it's been for, my time in my 6 seasons covering the team and your lifetime of being here in Pittsburgh and growing up a Steelers fan and obviously now covering the team. It just feels like it's almost inevitable in that way. So, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, I agree. I was just gonna say, like, they're getting kinda boring to cover and talk about because it's just the same thing. Like,
It's the
they
same.
feel to me like they're so stuck in the middle that they play 17 coin flip games a year.
Yep.
And, ha you know, the last couple years, they've won more of those coin flips than they've lost. But it just feels like no matter how good or how bad the opponent is, the Steelers aren't so bad that they can't at least be in a competitive game against a decent team, but they're also not good enough to ever pull away from any opponent. So it's just a bunch of coin flip games in a league full of parity. And they kind of represent this mushy middle in an AFC that's full of mediocrity.
Yep, that sums it up perfectly. Well, we are going to take a quick break, but when we come back, we are going to bring on the Athletics Ravens writer Jeff Zrebiec. I hope I pronounced his last name correctly. We will ask him for that correct pronunciation when he joins us momentarily. Stick with us. This is the Insiders. And welcome back to the Insiders. We are now joined by Ravens beat writer for The Athletic, Jeff Zrebiec. Jeff, thank you so much for your time. We are thrilled to have you here. I don't think that anybody thought these two teams were going to be at the record they stand at currently coming into this week 14 matchup. I feel like Mike and I said in the last segment, if you looked at the season and said, hey, coming into this game, both teams were really going to be fighting for that lead in the division, I would have believed you. But both teams come into this game sitting here at 6-6, something I don't think anybody anticipated for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like this game should be the biggest game of the week, and everyone should be touting it as this latest classic between, I would say, but what's arguably the best rivalry in football, or what at least has been over the years. But all you're hearing now is about not what's at stake really Sunday. And we hear some of that, but it's all about what's wrong with these two teams and how did they get themselves in position where they're basically fighting for their playoff lives with a 500 record. Yeah, I mean, I watched the game Sunday because the Ravens played the Thursday night game, so I had a chance to, and I've watched a good bit of the Steelers, but when you have a chance to kind of watch them, and it's funny, different aspects, but you see sort of the same kind of general themes involved in the same teams being disappointments. Like you hear the questions about whether the longtime Super Bowl winning head coach has sort of gotten stale and lacking in identity in different areas of the game and not playing good enough defense, which has long been a staple of these two organizations. So it's an interesting matchup. I know I would not have been surprised if you told me that these two teams would be meeting at this point with first place on the line, but I would have been surprised if you told me both of them would be 6-6 and kind of spurring more negative questions than positives.
Jeff, when I look at it, I don't think the Steelers are that different than what people expected. Like they're always about 9, 10 win
Yeah.
team, but there were huge expectations for the Ravens. I think they came into this year as the favorite to win the Super Bowl. They've got Lamar Jackson. We saw what he could do with Derrick Henry last year. My question for you is, where have they fallen short? Like, why is this team been so unable to put things together, and why are they so far away from the Super Bowl contender we expected?
Yeah, I wasn't one of those guys that was calling it the best roster in football, but I was saying it's amongst them. But where I was wrong, where others were wrong, I think is they're just not strong enough on either the offensive and defensive fronts. And offensively, they really only lost one starting offensive lineman, but they're depending on a lot of younger guys, and it just hasn't come together at all. They just the best Ravens teams are able to set the tone up front with their offensive and defensive fronts and be physical, be bullies, all those cliches. And this team's just not been capable of doing that. And I think they lost their best interior defensive lineman, Nnamdi Madubuike, with a neck injury. Kind of sounds like his career could be, they're worried about his career at this point. And they just never recovered. They're just not strong enough up front. So I think that's where it started initially. But then you go into their offense just, this is probably the best collection of skill position players that they've had in the Ravens offense. And it just hasn't worked. I think early on they were trying to get everyone involved and make sure they were sharing the ball. And I don't think that worked. I think that, they haven't been able to get everyone involved. But lately the story on this team, guys, is the quarterback's just not playing very well. And Lamar has spoiled people with his form, won 2 MVPs, could easily won a third, last year. But he's just he's not the run his health is clearly an issue. One, he's not really running, and when he is running, he's not as elusive as he once was. I mean, we're talking about a guy that does not have a 20-yard run all year, and it seemed like he used to rip off one of those per half, and then I think it's affected him with his arm too. I think I saw a stat the other day that he's like second in the league in off-target throws, and he's really improved as a pocket passer. That's not the kind of quarterback he is. I think health has something to do with it, and I think it's a confidence thing too, and they're sort of falling short in that, and they buried themselves into a deep hole with the 1-5 start, and confidence took a hit, and I think they've just had a real problem. They've dug out of it a bit, but they're not there yet for sure.
Yeah, it's like I keep waiting for the Ravens to put it all together,
Yeah.
and they haven't. And I completely agree with you. I mean, you watch the Ravens every single day, but the times that I've watched them, you always know that you're going to have to live with the bad and the good with
Yeah.
Lamar. And he's
Yeah.
going to take sacks, he's going to hold on to the football, but also half the time he's going to extend plays and create downfield or make something happen with his legs. And it feels like that element of it is missing a little bit when it comes to Lamar. One thing I'm curious about though is, like, you go back to even June, OTAs, and the defensive coordinator, Terrell Austin, was saying, we have a Baltimore problem. He acknowledged that the Steelers got the ball run down their throats in the 2 meetings in December and then January. And ultimately in January, they gave up 299 rushing yards. Now, the Steelers defense doesn't look all that better positioned to handle this. They just gave up, what was it, 249, 247 rushing yards, something along 250 to the Bills. But can the Ravens, if they want to, still play bully ball? Can they still get back to that, or is that just not part of their identity this year?
That, I guess we've seen it at times, but not much, and that's the big thing. They just haven't been able to kind of impose their will and be real physical with teams. I mean, that Bengals defense, you guys saw that up close. That was on pace to be a historically bad defense, and they still may be. And, the Ravens made some plays. I don't think they were overwhelmed, but it just, they weren't moving. They don't move bodies in the run game. They're still highly dependent on Lamar's improvisational skills and making plays, and that's part of his brilliance. That's going to be a part of it. But we haven't seen a team that's capable of just controlling the game with their offense on the field like we saw in that playoff game, like we saw they haven't been able to do that to Pittsburgh until the last two meetings last year, but they've been able to do it to plenty of other teams, and we just haven't seen that this year. Like, they saved their season with that 5 straight wins, but they were beating struggling teams, and they sort of were doing it by squeaking by. Like, everybody in the national media and even some locally are like, they keep waiting for this Ravens team to show up. And, what week is this? I mean, at some point, you're just not that team. You are what you show repeatedly. And we just haven't seen that team. I even saw some of the quotes today, guys, about, the Ravens run game. They're running okay. The number's okay, but this is not the run game that we've seen in recent years. And that's everybody. That's the quarterback not running the ball as well or not being as elusive. That's Derrick Henry, I don't think, has broken as many tackles or been as explosive as he was last year. And the biggest reason, that's the offensive line. The offensive line is just not moving enough bodies. Henry's getting hit way too early, which he hadn't happened last year.
Now, Lamar obviously is such an integral part of this offense. You mentioned his health. I feel like every, Wednesday, we see some report of he's not practicing and it's a toe this week. He's not practicing and it's a knee this week. How healthy is he from, all that you guys know up to this point? And what can we expect from him? Like, what percentage of the true Lamar do we think we're going to see in this game on Sunday?
Yeah, we've had hamstring, then we had knee, then we had ankle, then we had toe, and I guess heel. We're due for a heel this week. I don't know. I will say the silver lining of their performance on Thursday against the Bengals was he looked healthier. He looked like he was moving around a little better. Now, not the Lamar from last year, not the Lamar in peak athletic form, but he was moving around. He created some plays with his legs, even if they led to throws or even he ran a little bit. He seemed much more willing to run, and I think that's a positive. Now you're going to have a stretch where, he's had a couple days off. I mean, the best part of the Thursday games is kind of a mini bye. Meanwhile, the Steelers played a really physical game Sunday, had some guys banged up. So I think this is probably as healthy as we've seen him. We're going to see him since he hurt the hamstring against the Chiefs. But yeah, he's not going to be 100%. And I think John Harbaugh said Monday, look, he'll practice if he can. That's not exactly a glaring endorsement. I just think they know he's not going to be 100% all year, and they're just having to battle things. But I will say last week he looked better physically and athletically than what we've seen in the previous couple weeks.
Let's flip over to the other side of the ball for a minute here, and focus on the Steelers offense versus this Ravens defense. And as you mentioned, this doesn't look like a classic AFC North defense by any means. And in one of those ways, when I'm looking at it from a distance, Jeff, is it seems like the Ravens have not gotten a lot of pressure on quarterbacks. So I'm looking at this matchup, and like, the Steelers seem to have one thing that works for them offensively. They get the ball out of Aaron Rodgers' hands quickly before the pass rush can get to him. He's a precision passer. He gets it to DK Metcalf. They create yards after the catch. So with that in mind, like, how do the Ravens match up against an offense that's pretty limited, and that one thing that I just mentioned is such a huge piece of their formula.
Yeah, the Ravens, when they've been able to kind of manufacture pass rush, it's been on simulated pressures. They just it can be simple sometimes. They just don't beat the man in front of them. They don't get a ton of pressure on the quarterback. And we saw Burrow. They played well in the first half against the Bengals, despite the fact the offense kept putting them in bad spots. But Burrow started getting a beat on him. He was getting the ball out, and they kind of figured out their simulated pressures. Blitzes weren't getting home, and that's the defense is a much better defense than what they were playing earlier, but that's the Achilles heel. They just don't have a ton of, like Kyle Van Noy had over 10 sacks last year, hasn't been the same guy this year. They traded Odafe Owe, who's had some big games in the past against the Steelers. They're depending on a rookie second-round pick to play like 70% of the snaps. They just got a trade acquisition, Draymond Jones, who's probably playing more than they anticipated. So that's the problem. If other teams are getting the ball out quickly, finding matchups, sort of preying on that, that's what they struggle to combat a little bit. I mean, they asked Kyle Hamilton to do so much, but there's only one Kyle Hamilton on the defense for them. And, I think we saw last week, or when they made their 5-game winning streak, they were playing young quarterbacks or struggling quarterbacks. Struggling was two young quarterbacks. They played Gabriel and Shador Sanders in that group, and they played J.J. McCarthy during that period, and they played Caleb Williams, and they had some success getting to those guys with some of the simulated pressures. But, you expect the veteran quarterbacks to handle that a lot better, and we certainly saw Burrow handle it a lot better. The Steelers will be well equipped to handle it because they've seen it so much.
I'm kind of curious too, like the temperature among the team right now, because both these two teams kind of felt like they were trending in opposite directions. Where, the Steelers started off as hot as they did, had that lead in the division. They've seen it since dwindle away, whereas the Ravens started with that 1-5, and they've found the ways to come back. Obviously, of course, losing to the Bengals on Thursday night. But just what's the temperature among the organization right now? Is this a team that's feeling confident? Hey, this is a division that we can go win. We can make some noise, get into the playoffs with a very up and down and questionable AFC this year. What's it like?
Yeah, I think it's split. I think there's part of them that are frustrated by particularly offensively, why has that been such a struggle? I think defensively, with some of their pieces, and then you lose your best guy up front, you anticipate, Marlon Humphrey hasn't been really healthy. Hamilton hasn't been all that healthy. You anticipate some issues there, but I think there's a lot of head scratching and frustration about why they're playing so poorly offensively. They returned almost their entire offense minus a starting guard, and they just haven't been able to find, consistently find that recipe. But I also think, they know they have Lamar Jackson, and he's talented as anybody. And if he flips that switch, if something gets him going, if he has a couple drives and gets really hot, I mean, they're capable of going on a run and beating anybody. I mean, we've seen that over the years. He's that talented. And I think they feel awful fortunate to be in the situation where, as poorly as they played at times, some of the things they've dealt with, they're 6-6 here. And, 3 divisional games left. And if they win those 3, there's a good chance they win the division. Not guaranteed because they have 2 tough out of division games too. But so I think it's a mix. I think there's frustration, but yet I think they still feel like they're in a pretty good spot here if they just figure stuff out, particularly offensively, where they can go on a little bit of a run.
Well, Jeff, we thank you for all your time. I have one more question for you. Now, every week at The Athletic, we do something called the AFC North Whip Around, where all the writers within the division answer the same questions. Commenters love it because they get to talk shit to each other, which is always entertaining as well. But one of the questions this week is, which team would be the most dangerous if they get into the playoffs? So forget, like, we've tried to predict and project what's going to happen, and this is a crazy division in the
Yeah.
AFC North. Who knows how this is going to shake out? But are the Ravens still the most dangerous team in the division, or have the Bengals or the Steelers surpassed them?
Yeah, I think in answering that question specifically, like right now, I would probably say it's the Bengals, like just because I think they have the one unit you can count on. Like their offense, well, the Browns have a great defense, but they're so far away.
Yeah.
So it's hard to even consider them. But the Bengals have that one unit you could really count on. And they also have a quarterback that has played really well in the playoffs, has been to a Super Bowl, has toppled the Chiefs in a key spot, has had the Bills' number in recent years too. So I think if you're the other AFC teams, those teams that are going to have the top seeds, and I don't think you want to see the Bengals in. I'm not saying either the Ravens or Steelers will be a cakewalk. Each team will present its challenges, but to me, the most dangerous right now is probably the Bengals. And, they don't have to be great defensively. I mean, their defense is terrible, but they don't have to be great. If they could just play adequately, get a couple stops, that can't be too much to ask. Just get a couple stops once in a while, turn the ball over. It feels like the Bengals could pretty much score on every drive, if Burrow is sharp. So I think it's probably them. I mean, again, people are so again, a lot of national media, I think the Ravens get the benefit of the doubt a little bit, probably with me at times too. But, it's just fair to wonder when that team's going to show up. They may just not show up this year, but they just haven't earned the benefit of the doubt this year if you're watching them from a week to week basis, which is why I'd probably say the Bengals. I don't think they've lost this year when Burrow has played. I think it's only 3 games,
Yep.
but Burrow historically plays well in cold weather, and, he's proven it in the playoffs too. He's played well. That's the one kind of thing missing from Lamar's resume, the playing well in the playoffs. So I'd probably say the Bengals, to be honest. Now, I don't think they're going to get in, but look, if they beat the Bills, man, I think the Ravens, whoever wins this game, is going to be awfully tight, knowing they're pretty close in the rearview mirror and they're picking up some momentum with Burrow.
It feels like it's going to be a wild finish with
Yeah.
5 weeks to go, but it always feels that way at this point. It really does. Jeff, thank you so much for your time. Please let people know where they can find you, follow you, and read all of your fantastic work.
Yeah, I'm at Jeff Zrebiec on Twitter, and I'm going to be working on, hopefully me and Mike get together to work on a piece. It just feels like such a odd week because it's such a big game, and yet I was watching one of these talk shows, and they were talking about 4 or 5 other games. And I'm like, wait a second. I mean, but the teams have earned that from just not playing that well. So yeah, it'll be a fun week. And I said at the beginning of the year, this stuff kind of happens. You just had to know that week 18 Ravens at Pittsburgh game was going to matter somehow. Either somebody's trying to clinch the division or someone needs to win to make the playoffs. And it seems like we're heading towards that quickly.
It feels like it, at least in my time that I've been covering the team. This is my 6th season now. Every year it's been that week 18 game.
Yep.
It's always been in Baltimore, though. I'm kind of, not going to lie, I'm excited to have it at home this year. I'm very excited to have it here in Pittsburgh. But Jeff, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it, and we will see you this weekend.
Sounds good. Safe travels, guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks so much for joining us on The Insiders. We will see you next week.